This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
And your one-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Parallax.
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real. Welcome to the NHL, a game winner.
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den.
Welcome into episode number 84 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. I'm Noah Grant, joined alongside my co-host Nick Maxon. Nick Maxon enjoying some personal time here, I believe, at a wedding this weekend. So congratulations for hanging out, enjoying life, enjoying fun under the sun or the stars. How would you explain that?
I mean, both technically were out. So
yeah.
Here in good old Des Moines, Iowa, spent, again, 3 years at Iowa State University. So long lost buddy of mine who, met his bride. So we're celebrating that last night, and here we are today. So congrats to Robin and Jared last night on their wedding.
Yeah, it's been a long weekend, I think, even though we've been away from the Huskies a little bit, at least in person or in spirit, sort of ish. But nonetheless, we're going to talk about the men's hockey team. A very good weekend for them. Of course, the women's team was off. They've got Ohio State next weekend. We've got a little bit of Minnesota Wild talk for you, as well as talk around the college hockey landscape. And we're not going to keep you waiting. And we'll head right on to Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup.
Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Episode number 34 here in Center Ice View News and Notes, the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Again, as we talked about earlier, St. Cloud State taking care of business against a former WCHA foe in the Wisconsin Badgers. Got the sweep with 2 wins by 2 combined scores of 4-1 and 5-1 respectively. So 9-2 outscoring the Badgers there. And this is their their last non-conference schedule before the first NCHC conference schedule gets underway in 2 weeks. They do have a bye next week before they will travel to Colorado College and have their first ever game at Ed Robeson Arena. That just was unveiled earlier this fall. Meanwhile, again, as you mentioned before, the women's side was in their bye week per se already. So they will be on the road again as well, this time in good old Ohio, take on Ohio State. Let's take a little bit of a gander around the college hockey landscape. Michigan and Western Michigan split their weekend series. Duluth swept the Gophers in the Battle of Maroon and Gold. Duluth gets the better of the Minneapolis Gophers there. St. Thomas finally got their first win in Division I history. They knocked off I'm trying to remember who.
It was Ferris State.
It was Ferris State.
Yep.
Thank you very much. And the reason I mentioned that, Noah, is very nice post-game speech by Rico Blase. That was on social media. Congratulating his players, but also more work needed to be done. But that's a good first step in that program to try to build some momentum here. Colorado College. Speaking of the Tigers, they knocked off Boston College, their first ever win under Chris Mayotte, and North Dakota gained the split against Quinnipiac. So. Some good battles along this week, but St. Cloud may be poised to take maybe a jump or two in the standings this weekend after some of the final scores. We're going to talk Minnesota Wild here real quick. Team 4-0 after they took a come behind victory against Winnipeg on Tuesday game that I was a part of, and then again a 4-3 overtime against the Ducks just last night. So while they're finding different ways to win, they're grinding some out. Not so many dominant performances yet, and maybe some defensive foes that are making it a little bit harder themselves. But we'll probably talk a little bit about that later in the show. But still, you can't win them all unless you win the first 4.
Yeah, it's. On that quick point, it's maybe a little bit of a blessing in disguise that you win 4-0 and you have to come from behind and face some adversity. I think that that's playoff hockey, right? And kind of gets you tested for what is to come potentially during the spring. Speaking of NHL news, Evander Kane suspended 21 games for his actions using a fake vaccination card for COVID-19. Just not smart by any means. The forward was already embroiled in gambling debt. He's going to be ineligible to play until November 30th. So the Sharks were already without him, and they're going to be without him for a little bit longer. It was not the most ideal thing to do. So follow the rules, kids. Otherwise, you get suspended for playing hockey. Anyway, former Boston Bruin Jimmy Hayes. We had mentioned this one about a month and a half ago. He passed away back on August 23rd. Some new light coming in that story just quickly, that a mixture of fentanyl and cocaine was in his system. He was 31 years old when he passed away. So a couple of really good stories that have been out on that. So kind of a good lesson for young people, that are, I think for him, it essentially started through an injury for him that kind of led to that mixture. So important to be aware of things like that. Lastly, in injury news, Drew Doughty is day-to-day with a knee injury. Ottawa's Shane Pinto is out indefinitely. Columbus's Max Domi will miss 2 to 4 weeks with a rib fracture. Jose's Nikolai Kiznov will miss 8 to 10 weeks in San Jose there. In Tampa Bay's Nikita Kucherov is on long-term injured reserve after another injury lower body for him. And there's also no timetable for New Jersey's Jack Hughes' return after a dislocated shoulder. And once again, welcome into episode number 84. Noah Grant here, joined alongside my co-host Nick Maxon. Nick, as you had mentioned, kind of an eventful week for both of us, especially you got to take in that Minnesota Wild hockey game on Tuesday. We're going to talk about the Minnesota Wild a little bit, but in terms of that, how was the atmosphere? That was there are some hockey games that you get a ticket to, you don't know what to expect. I'd say you got your money's worth on that one.
No question. It was actually a birthday gift from another buddy of mine down here. He kind of surprised me a little bit a couple of days beforehand, and so that was a nice surprise. Was the atmosphere electric? Yes, it was. You could tell there was some pent up energy from the fan base. And I think it also helps that you have a pretty good team, at least to watch. It wasn't the cleanest game for either squad, especially for both goaltenders. A couple of bad bounces either way. But even though a lot of offense, and then again when you can win it in overtime, I think it's always a thrilling fashion. And a lot of good players to watch from both squads. Kyle Connor had the hat trick, and then of course Joel Eriksson did for the Minnesota Wild. So it's a nice opening game here at the Xcel Energy Center, but kind of what you expect pre-pandemic. They definitely had that feeling.
Yeah, definitely. It was a fantastic game. It was a good night for me. I just got involved with fantasy hockey for the first time this year, and I had pretty much that entire Kaprizov line as well as Kyle Connor in my lineup. So it was a good night, all things considered, actually. As we kind of roll through St. Cloud State men's hockey, why don't we start with them? A very good weekend for them. We had a trivia question about them as always. And the question did read, St. Cloud State men's hockey forward Yami Crandall. He currently led the team with 7 points entering yesterday's contest against Wisconsin, who is the only Finnish player in St. Cloud State Division I history to lead the team in scoring. And what year was it?
This one's easy. First, the name was Callie Costello. Trying to remember, was that 2013?
A little bit later. It was actually 2015-16. It was actually later in his career. Pretty good, though. He sits 6th all time, of course, in franchise history. He had 54 points that season. The only Finnish player to lead St. Cloud State in Division I history in scoring after a season. 153 total points for him in 157 games. So a very great career in a Huskies uniform. Of course, he was with the Toronto Marlies for a little bit, had a stint with the Anaheim Ducks. He's now over in the KHL where Jokerit in the Continental Hockey League. So Ben Holden is Ben Holden,
actually a pretty big fan of watching him play.
Yeah, he's a good hockey player. I think that's that's safe to say. And speaking of good hockey, men's hockey, like we mentioned, taking care of business, a 5-1 win on Friday night and a 4-1 win last night, outscoring their opponents by a combined score of 9-2. Did the St. Cloud State Huskies over Wisconsin, a Big Ten foe, coming out of essentially the non-conference schedule. Brett Larson had mentioned this as well, as the team. They're essentially 6-2, but they're really 6-1-1, so to speak, with that extra pairwise point against Minnesota. He talked about it. Before we talk about the games themselves against Wisconsin, how important was it for the Huskies to earn that sweep and push themselves right into the NCHC schedule against Colorado College next weekend?
Well, I mean, every game is important, right? Especially when you have the level of talent that they faced. I mean, this was a gauntlet of a non-conference schedule. It wasn't just in-state rivals, but these rivals were ranked. Again, Minnesota State, when they faced them, were number 1. The Gophers were number 4. So it wasn't a cakewalk by any means. And then Wisconsin coming in, they weren't ranked per se, but they had some folks giving them a look. They definitely have shown in years past that they can have a pretty good offense. We had talked last week, that their biggest question mark was maybe their defense. And I think the score would indicate that there was maybe still some trouble on defense for Wisconsin, but also got to give the Huskies credit. They can roll 4 lines most nights, and when they do, if they're all contributing, that they're a very dangerous hockey team. They just come at you wave after wave. So I got to give the Huskies some credit where it's due as well. So, but important, yeah, you always need points. You want to make sure, especially in non-conference or pairwise, is even more important, and more so. I think the team, when we talked to them on Tuesday before coming on the road here to good old state of Iowa, they feel good. In fact, Brett Larson had mentioned this was, it kind of feels like playoff hockey already. And I think that's exactly what you want early. So you want to get battle tested early, especially going to the NCHCs. You and I both know, Noah, this is a very, very good conference. There's not a team that you can overlook nor sit back. It doesn't matter what the record is. They're going to give you fits every single time. So this was a very good start to the season, 6-1-1. As Brett Larson had mentioned, I think he's technically correct on that as well. So I'll give him that. But now the real season starts. Now you got to go out there and take care of your conference. But again, game by game.
Yeah, it was a very good weekend, and a very good non-conference schedule for the Huskies. And we talked about so much, we didn't know what to essentially expect from this team. We didn't know if, they were going to fall flat on their face, start coming off. We believe in them. We knew what they were capable of, but you don't really know the on-ice product, especially against some really good opponents, Mankato, Minnesota, Wisconsin, until you really get a good look at the Huskies here. And I think that now it's important to just carry that momentum and get a really good start in the NCHC conference. I would say the Huskies, on paper, at least, have a favorable schedule heading into the NCHC battles, but nonetheless, I don't know that any matchup in the NCHC is favorable on any given night. No. It's definitely a difficult process as we go through. It's a couple of players that really stood out. We mentioned one, actually, the trivia question, Yami Crandall, he had 3 points this weekend. Nolan Walker with 2. Micah Miller, a little bit of a mini coming out party for him, a guy that gets underrated, and I think, has, I don't want to say struggle, but just really been a little bit snake bit in terms of his production at times throughout his career. It's nice to see him get on the board because he really is a great hockey player. And Kevin Fitzgerald, jeez. Boy, what a big boost it's been to just have him back. 4 points this weekend, and a guy that, he's a great locker room guy. He's absolutely hilarious if you've ever gotten to sit down and, chat with him. I mean, he just continues to, be a guy that really is a difference on this hockey team. And, you've been around Kevin, you've seen him, obviously off the ice, he brings a lot to the table. What is it on the ice that really kind of lends success to him? I guess from my vantage point, what I see, a lot of tenacious play on pucks. He's willing to be the first forward in and create havoc, create opportunities, not afraid to go to the gritty areas. And I think he's, in some senses, the epitome of the greasepan goals mantra that is Dave Shayak.
Yeah, but really what he brings is consistency. That all of what you said is great, but he brings that exact game plan every single game, every single shift. You talk about a guy that just does what he's asked to do, and he brings it to you every single time he hits the ice. That's what Kevin Fitzgerald actually brings. Yes, it's good to have him, like you mentioned, being the first one. He takes great angles. He's on the boards when he battles. He's in the front of the net also, like you'd mentioned, in those dirty areas, taking a beat down, winning those, stick position and those body position battles, getting rebounds. So, he's creating havoc. He does all these small things that we talk about in hockey all the time. It's those little things that maybe not necessarily find the score sheet, but as a player, especially in a teammate, it's those little things you appreciate a lot. And this team definitely is better with Fitzgerald in that lineup. And it's kind of nice to see him getting the score sheet a little bit too, because he kind of isn't a guy that I don't think if you were a casual fan would pick him out of the lineup and say this guy is an offensive threat. He's kind of adding that little bit of a twist to his fifth year. And I'm really, really happy for the kid, as you mentioned, because he's such a great leader in the locker room, great, emotional supported cast member. He's almost like another coach on the bench. So really happy for him that he's getting rewarded for his hard work.
Yeah, David Renick, a guy that a fifth-year player as well. He got the call on Friday night, did his job, and a guy that got the call yesterday, Jackson Caster, stopped into the net and stopped 31 shots in addition as well. Had a very good night, I thought, as well. It's nice to have that extra goaltender, and I don't even say extra in terms of a condescending way, just having that second goaltender, I should say, that you can go to. But David Renick has been very good this season. And, David has earned that spot, I think, so far, but it's nice to see Jackson Caster step in, play a good hockey team and a good opponent in the Big Ten as well, too. I mean, it's not like he was, playing a team that was 58th in the country. I mean, he stopped 31 shots against a very good Big Ten opponent. So important for him to get that confidence boost, I think, a little bit and feel like, I'm ready to go this season as well, too.
And just a small point on that too, Noah, as far as the goaltending trio that the Huskies have, again, Joey Lamoureux as well, Renick is going to need an enough here and there. There's no question about that. I would probably think that was more than likely the case, but how good is it that Brett Larson can reach down, to Jackson Caster / Joey Lamoureux and feel confident that, you can win the hockey game. And Jackson Caster, when we've seen him in, parts of the last couple of seasons, he's looked pretty good in between the pipes. So it's nice to have a quality goaltender depth in your roster, because again, you just unfortunately injuries can happen, and again, as David Renick, he's been marvelous so far to start this season, but at some point he's going to need to take a breather. And it's nice to know that you can almost do a 1A, 1B on your roster, and probably even 1C, honestly, and be able to feel confident no matter who's in between the pipes that you have a chance to win the hockey game. Yeah,
and obviously NCAA tournament time is a little different than the NHL playoffs, but nonetheless, having that 1A, 1B, a second goaltender that you can go to, like you mentioned, is important. And even a third goaltender, I think, on this roster, as you had mentioned, that you can go to. I mean, all three of these guys, they're a lot closer on paper than I think the lineup card sometimes shows. And obviously they're playing for one of the best teams in college hockey as well, too. So very competitive and very competitive on the ice. Jackson Caster, like we mentioned, doing his job last night. The one point of emphasis that I think does need to be touched on a little bit from this weekend, and Brett Larson had mentioned it a little bit on Friday, I believe. A little bit of discipline trouble for this team, though, this weekend. That was the one thing that kind of stood out, is a little bit of penalty trouble. They give up some special teams advantages there. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was a shorthanded goal that Wisconsin had scored during the weekend as well, too. And when you talk about special teams, for example, the games that I were working this weekend, Friday night's contest saw 92 penalty minutes and 22 infractions, and nobody scored on the power play. So it kind of tells you how that game went as far as the penalties were concerned. But if you're the Huskies, you're a team that plays with speed. You're a team that plays with skill. You're starting to infuse that grittiness into your game. That's been the difference maker, I think, from Dave Shayak and company. That kind of starts with him and moves on down. How do you make sure that this group is riding the line the right way? And we talked a little bit about, to talk about a guy that maybe was in the box a little bit earlier in the year, Jack Peart, who, of course, missed Saturday's contest with injury. Those are sometimes part of the growing pains of a new team or a young group, guys maybe chasing the game a little bit or just maybe being out of position just a little bit. Is this more a case of, the team still trying to kind of adjust to their identity a little bit, or what are you seeing in terms of the special teams play? The penalty kill, I think, has looked great for the most part, but obviously you want to stay out of the box.
Well, no question. You don't want to give your opponent any upper hand, anytime, especially when you're favored, right? I think the Huskies, I think we can rightfully say they were favored in this matchup. But don't try to go hand in them freebies, right? And more so to your point, from a hockey perspective, when Brett Larson is, when we talked about it before, his team is most successful when he's rolling four lines. Your lines get juggled. You get guys that are tired, and more so, you also get guys that don't see the ice when you're on the penalty kill. There's just guys that just simply don't kill penalties for you. So it does kind of, mess up your timing, your kind of your strategy, your line combinations. It definitely throws a wrench into it. And more so, like you said, is it one or the other? I don't know if it's chasing the game. I would say maybe against Wisconsin's a little bit of laziness, honestly. But, like you said, you don't want to, it's good that Brett Larson is acknowledging that, because that's just how the attention to detail his coaching staff is. Again, it's, you could probably say, well, why is he upset? They won 5-4 when he handed these guys, but still, he knows. And I think this team knows, starting in 2 weeks when you travel to CC, it's playoff hockey again. Those kind of mistakes, especially against Colorado College, which is undergoing a little bit of a transformation, but they're a team that's given the Huskies fits. There's a team that, just the way their structure used to be. Again, we don't know what their structure is going to look like right now under Chris Mayoff, but historically, they've been kind of a defensive first team. If they get a lead on you and you keep handing them power play opportunities, they'll start to frustrate you. And then that's when frustration penalties come out. Then you make the game, you don't want to make that mountain harder to climb on yourselves, by taking away maybe an arm. So it's important. I think the Huskies, again, special teams is always part of the conversation, I think are decent. But, if you can try to avoid, especially being shorthanded, obviously a better way to go.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the CC contest. We're going to talk about that in a second. Only a couple more things here for the men's hockey group. As you mentioned, the Huskies with a week off this weekend before they head down to Colorado College there. Speaking of changes in terms of lineups and things like that, obviously we mentioned Jack Peart was out of the lineup on Saturday, as well as Sam Henches, a guy who had just returned from injury, thought looked very well. Got on the score sheet a couple of times in Friday's contest, but wasn't able to return on Saturday. The other guy that was kind of in that mix was actually Nolan Walker. He was able to return actually at a point last night as well. When we talk especially about Sam Henches, how big is it for him to just maybe find that consistency injury wise? Obviously you can't predict the way that things have happened, but I mean, this is kind of what we saw with Sam a couple of years ago, where he just, he had that tough injury, he's kind of snake bit when he came back. He was playing well, just wasn't able to get on the score sheet. And the biggest thing as a player that you want is consistency in any way, shape, or form. You want to be able to feel that normal routine. Obviously COVID last year, I think, doesn't help anybody with that, but this year, coming back, he plays well, he gets hurt, he comes back, he plays well, he's hurt again. Hopefully the 2 weeks of rest will do him good and he'll be able to be back in the lineup against Colorado College. But what does Sam Henches bring to this lineup when he's playing well? For me, I think he kind of reminds me of Zach Okabe in a sense, where he's kind of a buzzsaw and a guy that's hard on forechecks, a guy that plays with speed through the neutral zone, a great transitional hockey player. But it's just been difficult for him, obviously with the injury bug.
I think for Sam, for him, his number one priority, consistency you want every player, but I think, and you'll have to wonder, I think the bigger question is, when we look back at his history with injuries, when he comes back, right, there's that, age old hockey question, and rarely for any sport, how healthy really was he? Was he at 100%? Probably not. Was he, the type of injury, some are easier to play through than others. And some injuries, maybe you can play through, but they still maybe hamper what you can bring as far as your tools in the tool chest. So if for Sam, what might be best for him is, if the 2 weeks don't do it again, I would say keep him out of the lineup. I think for him, he's got to get 100, as close to 100% as he can. There's no question that, he wants to play. There's no question Brett Larson wants him in the lineup. There's no question that he adds that spark, as you mentioned, offensively on the forecheck transitional. He's really good. But if he can't utilize those tools in his toolbox to the, his fullest extent, and it's going to hurt him maybe long term, then I think you really have to take a look at, what this injury is with him. And maybe it's, just time to rest it up. You don't do yourself any favors off the ice either, because again, some of these injuries you talk about with pro athletes, you can have these injuries start to get compounded, and then, you're talking, much worse consequences just from your personal body standpoint. So I think for Hentges, it's really important to get him getting him healthy, because when Sam Hentges is healthy, we saw him early in the season, he's a heck of a hockey player. And when he's, banged up and he's injured, he's just not the same player. So to me, 2 weeks are going to be huge to see, again, we don't know the fullest extent of his injury. Hopefully it's something where rest can help. And if not, I would say it's going to be one of those tough conversations. And if I'm Brett Larson, try to get him healthier. And that means maybe missing some more time.
Yeah, you talk about getting healthy. They have that period of rest, as you had mentioned, as they preview Colorado College. Boy, Nick, you look at this CC team. We talked about it might take a couple of years for them to make the jump. They've held par with a lot of teams in the college hockey world, knocking off number 10 Boston College last night, a 1-0 loss for them against number 20 Northeastern. They're not a bad hockey team. And one of the things I want to point out here, as you go back through their schedule, Nick, only twice during the season have they given up 3 goals. Which is important. Let me run you through the schedule here, because obviously we're very short in the season. They had Air Force for their opener. They lost by a 2-1 score, a 2-1 loss at St. Lawrence, and then a 1-1 tie for them in that weekend. Union College, they had a loss and a tie, a 2-1 loss and a 3-3 tie for them. And then getting in that win column, number 10 Boston College, a 5-3 win. What a fantastic win for them against a big name opponent. And then Northeastern, they're one shot away from tying that hockey game last night as well too. They've got Air Force next weekend for a 2-game set before they face the St. Cloud State Huskies. It's going to be a home and home against Air Force for them. Of course, don't forget Air Force, one of the few East teams, quote unquote, that is actually out west, out in Colorado, so to speak. So, Nick, Chris Mayotte, I would say he's put his stamp on this club fairly early as a strong defensive team, which I think Colorado College by nature always has been, but a team that's finding a little bit of offense, a little bit of consistency, keeping opponents at least within check, if not beating them. What do the Huskies have to look forward with this Colorado College group?
Well, when I asked, their captain, Brian, media day, what are you guys going to be different? And obviously didn't get into specifics, but he goes, yeah, we're going to be different. We're not going to be, essentially he used not necessarily the trap team, but I think they are still going to be opportunistic per se. I think you're going to see a little bit more aggressive on the forecheck and maybe a little bit more in the neutral zone where it's a little bit more man pressure. And again, I think Chris Mayotte knows with what he has right now, obviously maybe the offensive depth from the squad isn't, necessarily very deep. So you have to win close hockey games. And, you just read out the scores, the very close games or low scoring games. And if you're Colorado College with your makeup currently, that is your recipe to win. We know that CC in historical presences has had a stingy defensive stance. They can give everybody fits, including the broadcasters. So at the end of it, and that's a compliment to them. Honestly, it is a compliment because again, even with the Huskies, remember they used to play when Broadmoor, it was an Olympic sheet. Now with Ed Robeson, it is now down to an NHL sheet. So I think the smaller space and over time will actually benefit them. Especially with the way that they're going to play in, probably 2-3 years time. But again, CC is they're a type of team that makes you beat themselves, makes you beat yourself, honestly, because you just get frustrated, especially if you're not producing offense. So you kind of start to get away from your game plan a bit. And that's when CC tends to capitalize, is when, you start getting away from what makes you successful as a hockey team. So, don't overlook CC. Again, close matchups, again, low scoring affairs. The good news is the Huskies have been tested in some games early in the season that are like that. And they showed poise, but they're going to have to continue to show that poise again as we get into the NCHC regular season schedule here. Yeah, absolutely. Talking about the regular season, Nick, we've got college hockey left on the docket here, and we've got some Minnesota Wild hockey. We've got about 13 minutes left. I'm kind of thinking maybe we'll talk some college hockey. I think that might be a little bit more fitting, if that's all right. Sure. Let's start with the big one this weekend. And of course, obviously the St. Cloud State Huskies in our mind are always the big one, but the one that everyone had their eyes on, and boy, was it a heck of a series. That's the home and home, Western Michigan and Michigan, number one in the country, the Michigan Wolverines. This Western Michigan group, I know people have really kind of slept on them coming into the season, but I think people are going to be picking up their ears now. And like you mentioned, we've had them pegged as a team that I think we had them finishing third
actually in the NCHC. So very much possible. Winning on Friday night and then a 3-2 loss. That was a 2-2 hockey game that went right down to the wire in Kalamazoo last night. So this Western Michigan team, and let's talk about Michigan too. For the record, they're young, but they're a deadly group. I mean, what do both of these teams bring to the table moving forward? And I guess for our college hockey discussion, if we had to ask, are the teams performing at par, below par, or above par? What would you say for each squad?
So let's start with Michigan. Yeah, holy heck. When you take a look on paper, this is an incredibly talented team. And as our good friend Brett Holden would say, one of the more talented teams that's ever been put together in hockey ice. They're loaded. But again, no, are they experienced? Not so much. So I think regular season, you're going to see them, have success. I think, they have a shot to win the Big Ten, along with Minnesota. But when it comes to playoff time, right, that's where this team's really going to have the spotlight over them. This is where, does the inexperience, does the talent outweigh being tested in the playoffs? And so they'll have to answer that bell.
And that's when you talk about this weekend, by the way, that's where a series like this is huge for them. I think it's important to, not be winning games 5-1 and walking over opponents, having that adversity, maybe losing a game here or there. The St. Cloud State Huskies know this very well from a couple of years ago. It's important for a team that's high up in the standings to go through that adversity and see what that feels like. So when they get to a game like the Huskies did last year against Colorado College and you get scored on from center ice, you don't panic, you relax and you move on.
Well, and to that, it is early, right? So, I mean, talk about, every team, the Huskies are maybe one of the few that didn't have, the great turnover, as far as roster is concerned, but most teams do. So you're still trying to find the chemistry. You're still trying to find out, what everybody's all about in your line, obviously coach and trying to get the systems down. So you can't put too much stock into it, honestly. But, if you're Western Michigan, if you want to flip the script here, this was a flag in the sand moment for them that, they are for real. And again, as we talked about, I think actually, Noah, when we look back at it, we had Western Michigan finishing 5th because we had Duluth 2nd, North Dakota 3rd, and then I think we had Omaha 4th. But I will say this, that we made it very clear that 3rd through almost 6th spot it could basically fall any number of ways, right? And it was really, really tough, at least looking at them right now, or I should say before the season, to really know who's going to go where, just because everybody was so close. So, and I could be wrong on that standings, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter now, right? So Western, again, they had the offense, they come at you, right? They are a team that plays heavy. They play hard. And if they can find a little bit of that scoring touch, I mean, this is a dangerous hockey team because and similar to the Huskies, they just come at you in waves. They don't really have any weakness up front. They got a top 12, not a top 9, not a top 6. They got a top 12 that, maybe the top 6 are their scorers, but their bottom 6 know their role. They embrace their role too. They know exactly what they're out there to do, to keep other teams, off the board. And their defensive core is mobile. They're also heavy and hard as well. And they got a good goaltender also in between the pipes. So Western Michigan showing that, in that first battle up there, and those two squads that are looking to make their mark in the NCAA, that Western Michigan is not going to be a team to look over. And, we have it for sure. And I think the rest of the hockey world is now on notice for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree 100% with your sentiments there. And this Western Michigan group, I mean, we talked about them even last year, not a group that you wanted in the second half. And they gave the Huskies fits. They gave Duluth fits. We're going to talk about Duluth here in a second. The NCHC, as we look around, North Dakota earning a split against Quinnipiac. Those are two, I would say, pretty evenly matched teams as far as that matchup was concerned. A couple of other scores to kind of take a look at. Bowling Green 6, Miami 4. Great to see Miami score some goals against a pretty decent opponent. I don't know that Bowling Green has the strength they had in years past, but they're still a good hockey team and good for Miami to push the issue there, just not able to get over the hump last night. Before we get to that Minnesota Duluth series, the one team that I wanted to talk about, Nick, Denver, kind of a running gun game against Providence. They lose 5-1 last night against Boston College, kind of an up and down season again. I mean, they were sub 500 for the first time in NCHC history last year. Is this going to be another year of heartache for the Denver Pioneers, or are they going to find a way to right the ship?
I think they will right the ship, honestly. And again, talking with David Carl, NCHC, I don't know if he would say it was an excuse, but I know that the COVID schedule, the way that they had to run things, he knows that they were not all on the same page per se, and he acknowledged that probably hurt them in their production. I don't think that, obviously it's going to be, but again, it's early, right? These are non-conference opponents, so for the most part, and again, early in the season, especially 2-3 weeks in, you're still trying to find your feet a little bit. I'm not too concerned about Denver. What I am concerned about Denver is, holy heck, if they score, they're scoring in bunches. Yeah. So if you're an NCHC opponent looking at Denver, and I think we've always pegged Denver as a team that's always had, and some offense to give. Last year they really didn't show it, and if they did, you could score just as much on them. So I think for Denver, it's more about righting the ship defensively, and if that's going to be their key to really start earning some of those high caliber wins. But again, Denver's a team you can't sleep on either. I think they've got the talent pool, especially up front defensively, and especially in net, they got a heck of a goaltender. So we'll have to kind of see what they do, but I think they will right the ship. I just don't think it's early.
Yeah, looking around at some other Minnesota teams, Bemidji State, a 4-3 win against Northern Michigan. They're a group that kind of has that sneaky skill once again. I've liked Bemidji's game. And again, we talk about teams that they're not blowing opponents out of the water. I think that just bodes well as they go into tournament time. I think Bemidji, I think they make the NCAA tournament this year. Obviously, it's very early, but I think their trend continues as such. And if so, I think they're going to be a dangerous out. I mean, we saw that last year, but I think they have a chance to go even deeper the way that they play, just because they play a playoff brand of hockey. They kind of remind me of the CCHA's version, the poor man's Western Michigan, if you will, in some senses, the way they play. So, very excited to see some of those Minnesota teams doing well in the CCHA. Also, St. Thomas, their first ever win in Division I program history against Ferris State, 5-2 was the final score in that one. Nick, before we get to that big Gopher series, how big is it for St. Thomas and this program to finally get a win under their belt and really start that train rolling?
They always talk about, it's like anything in life. It's, once you get the first one out of the way, then the rest will start coming, right? It's that first step.
Well, that certainly didn't happen with this podcast, but everything else, I think is.
No. But to that point though, right? It's always, I think it looms over you until it happens. And I think, obviously even the coaching staff to the players, it's always, you just kind of want to get that out of the way. Now that they have, I think that'll kind of take a little pressure off their shoulders too, just to, I guess that's one less thing you have to talk about. But again, as we mentioned, the Rico, he's not so worried about the win-loss record with this club. He's preaching that, let's just get better every day. This is how we're going to win. He's a great leader. When I got that chance to talk to him prior to the St. Thomas game with the Herb, he's a very eloquent, very intelligent, very great hockey coach. He's a guy that really cares about his players, really, and cares about the game. Give that man time. And St. Thomas is going to, I would say, into probably 3 years. No, it's always, when you kind of hit that stride, but he's definitely the right man for the job. I really respect Rico Blase as a human being. Yeah. And again, back to your point, now that they got one, now they can go to the other. So it's huge, good to get it out of the way and build some confidence for that squad.
Yeah. And we talk about, obviously we're back to a more normal schedule, so to speak. It might sound cheesy as heck, but Nick, I mean, you're playing for the February, March hockey. St. Thomas is still a team that gets a kick at the can in the CCHA or something like that, coming off of that, trying to make a national tournament. I mean, you can always be a disruptor in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't matter where you're at as far as those things are concerned. A team that I wanted to mention too, by the way, that I think has gone well under the radar of Huskies hockey fans, knocked off Ohio State a couple of weeks ago, just lost to Holy Cross last night in the Atlantic Hockey League. That's Bentley. They're a team that you're kind of like Bentley. They're a team that I think you just keep an eye on them. They've been kind of a disruptor in the Atlantic Hockey and surrounding Big Ten area world. So there's a team to look at. Boston University, how about this one? An 8-6 score last night against Merrimack. That's a high scoring hockey game, but less than high scoring Minnesota Duluth, Minnesota, but the Bulldogs, the all-important double win. The Huskies might have been in line for a similar fate, if they hadn't been, pulled back into the room, so to speak. Anyway, Duluth, they're a team that we picked to finish second in the NCHC, maybe even first, I think. We had them pick first, and Ben Holden said, no way, Jose. But nonetheless, kind of gratuitous, I think, if we pick our own team. But nonetheless, Minnesota Duluth, They're a team that I think will be a top 4 team. A lot of people talked about that they're losing a couple of bodies, that they're not going to be the same team that they were. Well, they just took a top 5, top 10 team in the country in the Minnesota Golden Gophers and showed them who is now not little brother anymore in that matchup for sure.
No question. And on the other podcast that I'm on, the Soda Pod, I actually thought the Gophers were going to have the upper hand in that matchup. Just offensively, I thought, they move the puck very well. They're very quick. They cycle well. But there is one thing I mentioned in the podcast, too. If Duluth is going to win a game or the series, that they were going to do it from defensive play, and Scott Sandlin is a mastermind at getting you into defensive structure. And if you look at the scoreboards and both those matchups, that's exactly how they did it. There's no question.
2-1 last night. And has Scott Sandlin had success in the NCAA tournament recently with that formula?
A couple national championships, but who cares about that? So, you're right. No, but he's a coach that knows his opponent, and he gets his players to buy into what they have to do to win hockey games. And as you and I both know, as former players, you can't play every team the exact same way. Can you keep the overall structure and the overall identity of the team the same? Yes, but do you have to maybe attack certain teams slightly differently? Yeah. And for the Gophers, you definitely had to attack them a little bit differently. I think the Huskies in Game 1 on Friday had a defensive clinic against the Gophers, in terms of a team that is really anxious to shoot the puck and maybe sometimes anxious. So if you got in the shot lanes and really just got to the outside, most of their high-flying offense really couldn't do much. And it was long shots. They were easy shots for goaltender David Renick to handle. So there is a formula out there to beat the Gophers. I think we're starting to see other teams kind of pick up on that as, again, more film is coming out throughout the season, and you break that down. And again, Scott Sandlin, that program just continued to impress every single time, especially against that offense of Minnesota.
It was interesting when you said there's a formula for success to beat the Gophers. Caleb Peabody's voice popped into my head as always. And it was, it's simple, score more goals than them. Yeah. that right away. But nonetheless, two very good hockey programs. Obviously, it's nice to see Duluth. They were, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were a team that the Gophers essentially manhandled, so to speak. And then were maybe considered kind of like a Gopher light team. I don't think that they're in that category anymore. They're obviously 2 national championships, lends credence to that. But there
could have been a third one last year too.
Yeah, exactly.
In a row.
Exactly. Yeah, and they were undefeated at the NCAA tournament level for whatever it was, like almost 1,700 days with the stoppage and COVID and everything like that. So a very impressive run for them. Nick, we're just coming up on time here. Was there any other team that you felt like you wanted to talk about in the college hockey world before we move on over?
I think there's one team that we haven't talked about, and it's a team that I know Huskies fans don't like. So how about North Dakota? Yeah. And the reason why it's important to talk about Nodak is, it's funny when Nodak is a dangerous team, we always talk about them. When they're even just slightly underneath, all of a sudden it's like, wait, North Dakota, they have a hockey team. Don't sleep on them either, right? North Dakota, a lot of turnover in their roster. A lot of them, again, to NHL contracts. Let's remind ourselves that. But again, Brad Berry is a heck of a developer. He's part, the Coaches Network, along with Dave Starman, another good friend of the podcast. This coach knows how to develop players. And I think especially with the level of talent they recruit and the talent level they have, especially coming in this season, when they hit the stride, and they will, watch out for North Dakota. It's a couple of battles that you mentioned early for them in this season. But again, that's more growing pains for me. I'm very curious how this team's going to look in the NCHC regular season. We're going to start to see that, I think, next week. But again, North Dakota, always a thorn in the Husky side, and maybe to some of the fans' side as well, just because they travel so darn well. You got to love them for that, honestly. They make it fun. But at the side of it, the green and black, again, maybe not necessarily the top echelon team, but a team that, again, you cannot ever take lightly, because their talent alone can give you a lot of trouble.
The thing with North Dakota too, they split with Quinnipiac, who Quinnipiac is no slouch to a hockey team either. It's not like they split with a team that they maybe should have handled. Quinnipiac is a very good team. They showed that last year in the tournament, obviously running into a wall, I believe, against Mankato in that game. Thought they had that one locked out, and then suddenly they didn't. You know, I was kind of trying to go back here to take a look real quick, if I can, against North Dakota, kind of seeing where the Huskies were. The Huskies losing the last two matchups, but winning the two previous matchups before that, and then a tie before that. So it really has been a back and forth series to see, you know, as of late. I mean, you've got from 2002 onward. I mean, it's just, when you look at the schedule, green means a win, red means a loss, and a tie has nothing in between. And I see a lot of reds, greens, and grays all over the board, Nick. I mean, it's a very good matchup for the Huskies, and they're going to get them, you know, kind of later in the season-ish, kind of around that Christmas break mark, moving into January. So, I mean, like you mentioned, a lot of time and tune-up time for the big dogs from North Dakota to get rolling once again. I definitely agree. And hey, maybe if there's a game in Grand Forks, maybe I'll end up seeing you there. We'll have to see. I don't know.
Maybe we'll see.
Yeah, so, I don't know if I can sit in a sea of green for that long, but nonetheless.
Or even come close to the building, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. Nonetheless, that will do it for the main portion of our show. Stick around for the extra ice session. Again, this week, we're going to talk about some Minnesota Wild hockey. Nick Maxson was at that game, like he had mentioned, against Winnipeg. We're going to touch on that, as well as the Anaheim series and what has been successful and not so successful for this Minnesota Wild club. And welcome into the Extra Ice session. I'm Noah Grant, joined alongside my co-host Nick Maxson. Nick, pleasure to have you here. And it was a pleasure to have you at the game on Tuesday. You sent me some pictures from the Xcel Energy Center playing Winnipeg on Tuesday. Just a raucous, topsy-turvy game. You had an overturn offside call that led to a game-tying opportunity and decision, a 6-5 win, a 3-on-1, essentially in overtime. Joel Eriksson Ek with the game winner. And then last night on Saturday, Brandon Duheim gets his first goal in a Minnesota Wild sweater. Ryan Hartman with the overtime winner, and another kind of pseudo come from behind victory, if you will, against the Anaheim Ducks. Nick, let's start with Tuesday, because you were there. What did you see from this group? And I guess the bigger question for me is Minnesota Wild hockey, can we say it's finally fun to watch? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. You know? Yeah, it's much more fun just because you have players now like Kevin Fiala, Kirill Kaprizov, and even Joel Eriksson Ek trying to get into that category too, where every time that they're on the ice and have the puck, that's like you're just anticipating seeing something, right? Kaprizov, speaking of Tuesday's game, I think they win the opening draw, and he goes around the defender and Darren scores like to 11 seconds of the hockey game. It's insane what kind of skill that kid has. It really is. And just how calm he is when he does it. It just, it goes back to the Matt Anderson move, like in Los Angeles last year, where he did, kind of took him to the inside out move. And, he doesn't look like he's forcing it all. It just looks like he's just going around somebody that, like a little cousin on the, the outdoor ice. It's just like, well, I'll just scoot around, get by. But back to the game on Tuesday, right? First of all, Kyle Conrad, he had a nice little coming out party. He scored the first two goals for Winnipeg. A couple of bad bounces against Cam Talbot. If there's one trend we're noticing about this Minnesota Wild club is they are resilient, which is a darn good thing to see. And they have the character and they have the skill to come back in hockey games. I think in years past, you get down 2-0 early, especially a team like Winnipeg. And I know Winnipeg maybe isn't the same team. They were without Blake Wheeler in that hockey game too, which is huge for them, especially down the middle and up front. This is a team where I don't think we had a lot of confidence that they could come back, especially down early, right? They just kind of, I wouldn't say roll over and play dead, but they just didn't seem to have it jump, have that ability to come back. And that's kind of been the theme so far for the first 4 games of this season is, they've been having to come back. Now, as you mentioned, Noah, earlier is that a good thing? Yeah. Is it also a bad thing? Kind of too. I don't necessarily like the fact that I don't think they have scored the first goal yet this season. They've been 0-4 in that. So it's good that they're coming back, but also you kind of like to see teams. And I know there's a lot of, still some things to figure out in terms of lines. And I know Dean Evason is never shy about mixing and juggling his lines a bit more defensively. You'd like to see them actually get on top and then try to hold it too. I haven't really quite seen that from them yet, but overall the team plays fast, they play aggressive, and again, for the most part, even with, and I'm going to say this, and this is going to rattle some Wild fans, I think Matt Dumba has taken strides in his game with Jonas Brodin. I think that's, probably the perfect pairing for him, as we see forward. And this team was fun to watch. And that offsides call there, going back to Tuesday, I thought after watching it, I'm like, it's such a small margin. I really thought that they were going to let that stand, honestly. Again, you have the cameras in the blue line, but at first I'm like, you know what, we'll watch it, see what happens. And when they called it back, I was actually quite shocked. I was quite shocked. But then again, the chip out of midair by Eriksson to tie it, and then 2-on-1 for Winnipeg. And then, as you know, in overtime in hockey, if you get an odd man chance one way, if there's an odd man chance going back the other way.
And you need a save. Yeah.
You need to save, and can tell it. He made the save we needed to. 3-on-1 for the Wild as again Zuccarello, Kaprizov right back to Eck, and just perfectly placed. And Connor Hellebuyck, just really nothing much you can do in that situation, and just a perfectly one-touch pass play between those three forwards, and able to, I don't know if you want to call it steal that win in overtime, but you're able to earn yourself, a nice home opener win there against the Jets.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a case of you're playing with house money, right? When you get that call coming back and you kind of throw the kitchen sink and hope for the best. A weird fluky goal. I mean, that's the type of goal you score to tie a game, though. Is obviously you generally don't bat them out of the air, but just traffic and chaos in front, you never know what's going to happen. I was kind of curious real quickly, Nick, with that offside call, what kind of views do you just have the views kind of that we have on the watching the TV broadcast in the building? I mean, was it a little bit different to kind of game perspective of what that play looked like until you got home, or was it pretty evident from the camera angles they had in building that you saw? Because I think to the objective fan, and obviously the NHL has a little bit more views, especially on the opposite side of the bench, I think, than we do. And I'm sure they played it back frame by frame with multiple looks. Did you go back and finally say, okay, yeah, that was probably offside? Did you see it in the building, or are you still kind of convinced that it was a little bit tighter than one would think?
So we talk about this with camera angles because, we actually had a segment during the summer on this, what was it? The one moment that still ticks you off as a fan base, or maybe. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that was the parallax angle, right? So the parallax angle, again, it plays dividends in these situations too, right? If your camera is off center of something, you're trying to go from a line judge, it may look like, hey, it's either onside or offside, but the reality is it's not on a line. We have no idea. Excuse me. But again, the NHL and the hits booth, right? There is angles that the NHL only has access to and the broadcasters do not. So at the end of it, there's that blue line camera that's right there. Well, I never saw it. They never replayed that inside the building. Sure. And that's by design, of course. Yeah. Especially, and it was a close play, right? And I'm pretty sure with the NHL, again, that the rule with the NHL is if it's call on the ice as a goal, there has to be, evidence to overturn it, which means they had to see something that said, hey, that skate was fully inside of the and probably a little bit of white paint in between, and the puck was still on the line. So I think just judging by just the way that the procedural is supposed to go, right, that angle probably was their best angle, and it probably showed them, at least in my opinion, that it was indeed offside. And for folks who, and this is kind of the quirkiness of the rule, right? Because when you're already when you're a player without the puck and you straddle the blue line, right, you're technically onside. Yet when the puck carrier, completely different. The puck's got to be in first. And Thomas Evander actually has been caught guilty of this, where he sort of, as a right-hander, when he's been on the left side, he tries to kind of curl in, right, and he actually backs his skates in to the line right before he catches the puck, and that is an offside play.
Well, yes and no. The difference is you actually, as the puck carrier, you actually can enter in backwards, but you have to have full, clean possession of the puck, which at
times he didn't.
Yeah, which is a weird caveat to that rule, which I don't understand that one in general, to be honest with you. And again, I don't know. They might have a view up above the blue line. The NHL does. They have, obviously the ones on either side. I think the thing that, I was obviously happy about it. I thought it was offside, by a small margin, by a hair or less. I think the thing that's, like, if you're a Jets fan, that really bites, and I guess if you're a Wild fan, now that we have the last laugh, is humorous, is, it had no bearing on the way that play was going to finish.
No,
you know what I mean? And I think it's a good lesson for young hockey players. Just make sure that you're tagging up on that play if you know that you've got a guy who's got a wide open shot at the cage there. Because that could completely change the complexion of that hockey game, and a game that was a high scoring game, Nick. And I you're welcome to continue your point. I kind of cut you off there, as usual. But I also kind of want to ask if you could follow up for me as well, too. There was a lot of talk about Cam Talbot not having the best night. I don't know that that game was on Cam Talbot. I think Cam
Not
Talbot
really.
has kind of had a run of bad luck. Like you mentioned, a couple of tough bounces. I think Cam Talbot, for the most part, has looked all right in the Minnesota Wild uniform this year.
You can't look at a goaltender's performance just merely at the stat line. You just can't. You actually have to watch the plays, and because as hockey fans know this, and if you watch enough, hockey sometimes is a game of really funny bounces. It just happens that
Like
way.
the Joel Eriksson Ek goal.
Exactly. So, and if you're really, and the opposite, if you're going to throw that on Connor Hellebuyck, get the heck out of the room. Honestly, that was, what are you supposed to do about that? So, first goal by Connor, I believe it hits off, was a Kulikov's or Merrill's stick, and then it doesn't beat him short side, sure, but I think the way that he was set up was to actually go outside on that, and then just that little deflection, changes the entire trajectory of the puck, and you're just not ready for it. So
Matt Zuccarello scored a similar goal in the second period too.
Exactly. So, I don't, again, you're right. This is not really indicative of Cam Talbot. Now, if he's taking straight shots with no traffic, no deflections, and let's say his rebound control, where it's putting it straight back into the slot to create a second opportunity, or let's just say that, it's a shot from the point that he should easily grab and hold on, and he's given up, a rebound in front of him. He's not controlling that kind of thing, right? That's a conversation where we can absolutely look at Cam Talbot and say he looks shaky. He's not tracking the puck. His rebound control is not there. Right. And this situation, a lot of what happened on Tuesday is just the way that sometimes the puck just has eyes and finds that little hole that you're like, how the heck did that even happen, right? So a lot of deflections, again, a lot of moving pucks. And again, Winnipeg's a team that likes to play in front of the net. They love to, create traffic and love to take away the vision of the goaltender. So not a lot for Cam Talbot, I think, at least as a goaltender, to really put on him. Obviously, and the big thing is, as a goaltender, he made the save. We talked about this earlier, when you need him to, right? That was that 2-on-1 in overtime. He does come across, get a nice push from his left to his right to make that save. And then more so have the, ability to, at other times to come out big. So at the end of the day, it's not about sometimes the ways. Well, it is about how you save on it. That's going to be a terrible point. But also, sometimes if you're having games like that where a puck just seems to be, not going in straight, it's taking bounces. You just have to have those timely saves, and he got one when he needed to, and the Wild take advantage of a transition play in overtime and able to help their goaltender out.
Yeah, the biggest mark of a goaltender that you kind of go back to is you ask him to make all the saves that he's supposed to make, and you try to see if you can get one or two that he's not supposed to make. And that's kind of what it is. And when you have redirects and deflections and funny bounces, and then it's weird, you'll have some nights where, you'll have a shooter who picks a corner, he's got half the net to shoot at, and it goes off the knob of your stick, and you find a bounce too. It goes both ways too, for goaltenders as well. I think the thing that needs to be said is, he's not the Swiss cheese in high danger situations that Devin Dubnyk was. He's not, or giving up the leaky short side shot on the goal line that, could be the dagger for Minnesota. And credit this Minnesota group, like you had mentioned, they're not the team that if something like that happens, they're going to roll over. Where 3-2 halfway through period number 3 is now a death sentence for this group unless they get lucky. They're a group that, high flying offense. They're able to hang with hockey teams. They're able to handle the 2-1 hockey games or 3-1 games. They're able to handle the 6-5 games. Everything in between this group has been able to handle what has been thrown at them so far. Obviously, another win for them against Anaheim last night, a great overtime win. Ryan Hartman continues to impress, I think, with his play. Marcus Foligno has been a tank. Brandon,
the Spartan punch.
Yeah, you were witness to that. That was
That
was Kevin Bieksa 2.0, if you will. That was seriously akin to that. And, Brandon Duheim as well. He finally gets his first last night. The mixture of grit, speed, and skill for this group, there's something about this team. And I know we say that every year, right? But there's something about this team that I think lends itself to the locker room cohesiveness. I think finally we're starting to see that glue kind of mesh a little bit in that locker room. And that's something that with the old regime, as we would say, the Chuck Fletcher era, the old core, Mikhail Granlund, Charlie Coyle, Nino Niederreiter, Ryan Suter, Zach Parise, maybe it was there and we made too much of a deal out of it. Maybe there was some disarray in that locker room. This group, I think, finally is starting their own identity. And it's kind of, with Freddie Gaudreau, I think Freddie Gaudreau looked a little bit tough in the preseason. I think he's looked great in the regular season so far. And I don't want to characterize the bottom 6 guys as an island of misfit toys, but I think they're a group that on paper, you look at them and you say, oh, there's no way this is going to happen. Or why is Marcus Foligno up on the second line tonight? And all of a sudden you see Marcus Foligno get a Gordie Howe hat trick or somewhere close to that and play fantastic hockey. This group is finding a way to take some slightly jagged, misaligned puzzle pieces and turn them into a nice, straight, pretty picture right now. And it's paying dividends. And I think the defensive core, I think I'm looking for, if there's a guy I'm looking for a little bit more out of, I think it's Alex Goligoski, just a little bit. I think he's got a little bit more in his game. But that third pairing defensive core, Kulikov, Merrill, still looking fantastic, I think, as well. And that's exactly what they're doing, what they're supposed to do. Obviously, at some point, I hate to break it to you, Minnesota fans, the Wild will lose a hockey game during the regular season. It will happen. I'm curious to see how they respond to that sort of adversity. And I think that's going to be another test, another measuring stick about how this team can handle and bounce back. So,
yeah, no question. And then just kind of wrap up with the Wild here, Noah. You talk about, this team and their identity and Alex Goligoski. I think that's more just, new team, new system, new line, new blue line made.
It's only been 4 games. I mean,
right. And we talk about this, I think, a lot, but, I'll just replace it, in the National Hockey League at that level, you really, the chemistry part of it, especially as your D-man partner, is so important. You really have to.
And I should say he's got 3 assists and he's +1 in 4 games. So it's not like he hasn't done what filling the void of really Ryan Suter should be. So,
right. But to that point, right, you want a guy of his caliber, again, Alex Goligoski, to be able to have the confidence to be, that fourth, offenseman. That's kind of what he brings, I think, as part of that two-way forwardness. But again, you have to be able to trust your partner is going to cover for you, right? So I think that they're just trying to figure each other out. And at some point, at that level, what you want is you literally can close your eyes and then, almost like in a zone entry, and you could just think and feel where your partner's at. And without even looking, it's either a drop pass or a pass to the opposite side. That's the kind of confidence you have to have in your other partner on your pairing. And right now they're still trying to build that. So, and I think it'll be fine, honestly. But as you mentioned, Kulikov and Merrill have been solid as far as the third pairing defenseman is. Again, they are who the other shutdown Ds are really not going to, get you much on the scoreboard. Although they've been, still pivotal in terms of the transition game. I thought I liked what I saw with them on Tuesday, again, live and in person. But even more so, you talk about Freddie Gaudreau. I agree. He's been really, really good as a spark plug, especially that second/third line. He's been kind of moved up and down. But even Victor Rask has looked all right. Yeah. Yes, Victor Rask. Mm-hmm. Yes, I mentioned his name. And you've seen with Dean Evason too, with Victor Rask, I think he did this in the preseason. I've seen it. I thought I saw this a little bit on Tuesday where Victor Rask sometimes would come out with Kaprizov and Zuccarello just to get a little bit of a different look. Again, they're comfortable with each other. It's not the, ideal pairing on paper for sure offense, but sometimes, it's, if you're just trying to change momentum for a shift or two, that's what I like about Dean. And going back to my final piece before I kick it back over to you, part of the identity of this team, I think, really comes from Dean Evason and his leadership. He's kind of a good mixture of a player's coach, but also a guy that's like, you're going to earn your spot. And, he expects, this, you to bring what you're best at every single night. So at the end of the day, I think there's a really good just attitude in that locker room as well from the coaching staff. And I think that, when you have, everybody on the same page, it just, it just naturally breeds success. And you just kind of hope that, it continues to go forward. And 4-0 is a good start. Like you said, they will lose a hockey game at some point. I kind of want to see it sooner than later, just to kind of, again, just get it out of the way. They're playing tonight. Yeah. So, we'll have an opportunity to maybe go 5-0 or 4-0. But again, in the Central Division, every point matters. And, the Wild are definitely having a good first couple steps here early in this 82 game gauntlet of a season.
Yeah, I think the phrase that I kind of go back to is in Bill Guerin, we trust. And the reason I say that is just simply because when you think about the third pairing, I think there were some question marks, Dmitry Kulikov, really, or John Merrill, really, or I guess Jordy Ben, really, which Jordy Ben's been in the press box. But I think you're starting to see a little bit of the game plan. And granted, it's a 4-game sample size. You never know. They could totally implode, in the next 4 games, obviously. But, I don't think people realize, and not so much on the forward side, I mean, obviously it's important, but having a good, reliable third pairing or a good third pairing defenseman is huge. I think back to the time where Nate Prosser was the guy that really solidified that third pairing for the Minnesota Wild for a long time. And that's kind of what you need. And I'm trying to pull up here. If I'm pulling up the stats, there's one more guy that I really wanted to ask you about, Nick. You might have heard of him. He's got 5 points in 4 games. He's got no goals and 5 assists. Some Russian kid. I'm kind of curious. He got signed to some big contract, and I'm curious through the first 4 games. How have you been impressed with this certain guy?
I know that fans want to see him get on the score sheet. There's no question we do too. But the thing about any player, if you're not contributing one way, you got to contribute in another way, right? And so that means, he's passing, and he's getting other. I mean, his last year too, there were some beautiful setups and beautiful reads that he had through traffic. Again, just with the way he controls the puck, the way that he opens his edge, especially on his forehand side. He's fun to watch, even just trying to find an open man. So he's been impressive. There's no question that, that sophomore slump, right? There's 2 ways you can look at that, right? One that is, is it the player, or is it that the teams now that you're facing have a year's worth of film on you, and now it's, can they adjust, right?
Yeah, and I think and the man still he's over a point per game player still right now, Yes.
Yes. So I think for Kaprizov, again, I like what I've seen. Eventually he'll get one in the back of the net. There's no question about that. I have confidence in the kid. But more so, again, he's finding other ways to contribute. And that means if he's got to, be the setup man sometimes, he's fine with that. And if anything, he's not. If this shows us one thing about Kaprizov, it shows that he's truly not a one-trick pony, right? You go back to some other, maybe some offensive players. I'll just throw in Austin Matthews a little bit. He was a pure goal scorer, but as far as maybe finding the open man, not necessarily the greatest passer. Sometimes it makes some goofy decisions. You don't see that with Kaprizov. He's a very smart, very high hockey IQ type player. So if you're not gonna put one in the back of the net, if you can certainly find open space or create, I think that's the one big thing that he does so well is create himself open space, but also creates those for others on his line when he's out there. If he's going to be the primary, the secondary assist, then hey, you're still putting points up, you're still contributing to team success, and it's not zeros, so that's better than nothing.
Yeah, and setting up a guy like Matt Zuccarello, who we didn't know what that contract was going to look like a couple of years ago, and I think the infusion of Kirill Kaprizov has really turned what could be a gross aging contract into. I mean, he's a team leader in points with 6 right now. A couple of things that I kind of want to point out too, Nick. Nico Sturm, 73.8% on faceoffs.
Wow.
And how about Joel Eriksson Ek, 60.26% right now on faceoff. A couple of the other ones not looking so great. I guess Freddie Gaudreau's under 50%. Victor Rask is at 31%. That's tough, but obviously when you're limited faceoffs, that plays a factor in it. Marcus Foligno's 100%. And I'm sure he'll sustain his 66.7% shooting percentage. I'm almost confident of it, right? But yeah, this team up and down the lineup. When you mentioned Matt Dumba, by the way, he's got 3 assists on the season. Nick, through 4 hockey games, he's actually the team leader in shots. How many do you think he has this year through 4 games?
He attempts quite a bit. 31.
Not that many. Temper your expect. Now my point looks terrible, Nick. But he has 18 shots from the back end, and he's the team leader in shots, which is.
I actually was going to say 20, but I was like, you asked, so maybe. So I misread your enthusiasm. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, you know how excited I get on this show. It's a great time. But I think when you talk about a guy like him, Brandon Duheim has 14 shots.
Yeah.
How about that? Ryan Hartman has 14 shots. These are things that they have more shots than Matt Zuccarello, Kirill Kaprizov. I mean, obviously part of that might be line matchup. We might have a great bottom 6 that's starting to roll over some of these other teams as well. But, that just bodes well when your bottom 6, those underlying statistics, people talk about, Nico Sturm, he's only going to get 10 points this year. He's only going to get 5 goals or something like that. Look at what he does. If he's generating shot attempts, if he's in the offensive zone, if he has a lot of offensive zone puck possession time,
winning draws.
Yeah, if he's winning draws, if he's in the plus column and plus minus, he's doing the things that he needs to do relative to his role. And I think that's the biggest thing with the Minnesota Wild that we saw all the way back in 2014 when they've got past the first round against the Colorado Avalanche. They had resiliency, they had no quit, and they had Cody McCormick as their 4th line freaking center, man. And he was one of the best 4th line centers because he played his role role and knew exactly what he was supposed to be doing.
I was so upset when they didn't bring him back. Honestly, I thought that he was such a big piece of them making those runs, and I really thought that if they could get him to even just a 1-year extension, that he would be just dynamite for that hockey club. I'm trying to remember. I think he signed somewhere else. I'm trying to remember exactly where.
Well, he was in Buffalo for a while. I mean, how do you not like a guy who's named after a pepper shaker brand? Come on now. Anyways, but nonetheless, I mean, this Minnesota Wild group definitely tune in for a game or two on TV. If anything, they're a good hockey team. They're fun to watch. Nick, I see you pulling some stuff up. Are you looking up some stats here?
I'm trying to remember their matchup tonight because they do play tonight. It was a back-to-back.
Yeah, I suppose I could have looked that up for you, huh?
And it is it Nashville? Nashville.
Yeah. Yep. And Nashville coming off of a 6-4 loss last night against Winnipeg too. So there's a comparable for you, but nonetheless, the NHL.
They're 1-4.
How about the San Jose Sharks? They were 4-0. Buffalo finally lost. Montreal was 0-4. Kotkaniemi scoring against his former team. We had some weird things going on in the hockey world, and I love it. I love every bit of it.
But again, it's early, right? So, do those trends continue, right?
San Jose is winning the cup. Nick, shut up.
I know. I wouldn't know what we're talking about. It's, I'm very curious on San Jose, only because, they've got some core pieces that have always been there. Logan Couture. Obviously, you've got Brent Burns in the back end. How does
Erik Karlsson, man?
How does Erik Karlsson, right? But, for them to be successful, he's got to return to his old form like he was in Ottawa. I'm not sure we're ever going to see that side of him again, because he's just broken glass glued together. I mean, I actually feel bad for the kid, honestly. But they're going to be they'll have to be drivers of the ship if they're going to have to get back there. And again, for San Jose, and it's weird that we talked about Evander Kane earlier. He was one of their best offensive point producers, and he's out for 21 games because of that suspension. And so far, again, early hasn't really affected him that much.
So if you want to run through, to start the season, 4-3 win over Winnipeg for the San Jose Sharks, 5-0 ass kicking against the Canadiens on home ice for Montreal, 2-1 win against Ottawa, and then a 5-3 win that we saw the other night against the Toronto Maple Leafs on Friday. And I think they play tonight. They've got the Bruins. They're actually in TD Garden there. So
making that East Coast swing. Yep.
Yeah. Have to see if that trend will continue. But I suppose for Sharks fans and also Buffalo fans, until they got beat by the Bruins last night, they were sitting a lot prettier maybe than they had expected. And if you're a Montreal fan on the opposite side, you're asking a lot of questions. I mean, that's just the way preseason.
That Kotkaniemi getting pulled. Now, it obviously one player doesn't tell you though, what the franchise is or where it's at. It's not going to a huge lever, but it is maybe the final brick, per se, that says something was about to change with this franchise. And, I don't want to say, because every team in the league earns a right to play for the Stanley Cup. There's no question about that. But what I also think it's fair to say, what the way that Montreal was winning was defensively. They really weren't outscoring a lot of their opponents. They were frustrating a lot of their points. They were actually playing some of the best neutral zone pressure hockey from forwards back I've seen in quite some time. Right. That isn't the case so far this year. So how do you fix that? I'm not sure what the answer is, but I do know for the so-called hockey capital mecca that is Montreal, whatever the answer is has to be figured out quick, or else there could be some heads rolling. Including Marc Bergevin. It
was an interesting comment too from Marc Bergevin saying, "I'm not worried. I'm not worried about changing anything." And who knows? I mean,
because if it wouldn't be him that's changing, it'd be the Molsons. That'd be him that's changed. So
yeah, I know, and I don't know. And
then again, that's the GM is going to say that no matter what.
Yeah.
What's he supposed to say?
And we've seen teams with tough starts. I think Montreal is kind of the team that does this, right? They either go on a really crappy run to start the season, or they go 8-1 and then they lose their next 10. And it's just like they have this weird fluctuation.
That's why he's not worried. He's like, we'll be fine.
Yeah, they'll probably win the cup this year. Honestly, that's just
right.
That's just how it works, right?
Real quickly, since you mentioned the Toronto Maple Leafs, oh boy, you talk about a fan base that is on eggshells, the team that's walking on eggshells. The Toronto Maple Leafs themselves, again, it's funny that, we're 5, maybe 6 games into the season, depending on who's played, maybe 4. And yet there's already like this, pandemonium sense of just pressure for the Maple Leafs to perform. I actually kind of think this is going to actually be good for the Maple Leafs, honestly.
Provided they come out of it okay, right? But
I think they will.
They're 2-3-1. Like, chillax, man.
Yeah, I think and that's when the opposite for them. They've come out the last couple of regular season. They've steamrolled people. Then, of course, the first round, a dumpster fire comes looking and says, "Hey, come back in here. Come on." Let's go.
Although I didn't pay attention to their game last night. Is that what you're referring to? Did you see the score last night? 7-1 loss against Pittsburgh. How about Pittsburgh, by the way? A team that 3-0-2 without Crosby, without Malkin, with a bevy of injuries and kind of a depleted core from what they had during their cup runs, essentially.
They look good.
Hockey's a funny game, man.
And that's when you look at the teams that, and I think that it goes to coaching, if you can play by committee and if you can, that's to structure, that's to coaching, right? If you have arguably some of the best centers in the world, Crosby, Malkin out of your lineup, and, you can still, can't take your older brother out from above the Ontario line and, give him, beat the living, what out of him. Holy buckets. I bet Sheldon Keefe and Kyle Dubas had a nice talk after that one, I'm sure. But
I just want you to know, I take great satisfaction in opening up my Google browser and typing in Chicago Blackhawks and seeing 7th in Central pop up in an 0-4-1 record behind that. Oh, boy. I'm okay with that.
And that's, I think, kind of been a surprise a little bit. I think,
they've gotten sorry to cut you off there, Nick, but they've gotten their ass kicked, man. I mean, the Devils game was close, the 4-3 game, but right, they lose 5-2 to Pittsburgh. They lose 4-1 to the Islanders. They lose 4-1 to the Canucks. They got the Red Wings tonight. I mean, it's just
and the 5-2 loss to Pittsburgh, they gave up 3 or 4 goals in the first 12 minutes of the hockey game. I mean, it was ugly. So it's been poor starts for Chicago. And, I think, at least I thought, with the addition of Seth Jones, with Marc-Andre Fleury, that, these are, swapping in out pieces that made them successful. I really thought we'd see a resurgence from them, especially with Jonathan Toews coming back. But again, the sentiment, we keep repeating, it is still early. Will they figure it out? Well, again, they're going to have to. I still think there's more in the tank for Chicago. I think a lot of it is just trying to figure some of the new face in the roster, just maybe figure some things out. But at the end of it, I'm not that worried about Chicago. Now, again, these are some of the games that you look back on the end of the season. If you're in one place or another, and you can circle these and say, crap, this stretch or whatnot, maybe hurt us the most. But I'm not going to write off Chicago just yet. I really can't. Marc-Andre Fleury is a very prideful human being. I still think a lot of the goaltender success, as hockey fans know, relies on especially the people in front of them, and I think there's a lot of still figuring stuff out too with that club. And if they figure it out quick enough, watch out, because I think that they still have a lot of great players that can put the puck in the net with Toews, Kane, and then of course Alex DeBrincat, Kirby Dach being back in the lineup. So that you've got some players that can do it, but certainly defensive woes have hampered Chicago for their first few games of their season.
Nick, like I tell people all the time, man, simple game, small biscuit, big basket, not that hard.
You make it sound so easy. Even a caveman can do it.
Yeah. You remember those commercials? Oh man, those commercials were amazing.
Even worse, they try to make a reality show off of it, and it just flopped. So you remember that?
Yeah. Well, we know Brett Larson wouldn't be in it. He didn't have the hair for it. But anyway,
oh boy.
Nonetheless, speaking of guests, Brett Larson, a 5-time guest on the show. He's not coming this week, but we're working on, I think, some men's hockey players. So trying to get that squared away for this week. Apologies, we did not have a guest last week. Kind of a weird scheduling week for us. Just things did not work out as far as schedules for the teams and other things as far as that was concerned. But Nick, I think that's going to do it for episode number 84. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the day.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Parallax.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores!
is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.